9th session of our course in social organization. And the lectures are lectures 17 and 18 in your syllabus on pages 59 and 60. I'd like to start tonight by reading just a brief passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 3. This particular passage of Scripture focuses on division in the church, and I'm not really going to be looking at division tonight, but rather I'm going to be looking at the issue of partnership in the work that God is doing. 1 Corinthians 3:1. Brothers, I could not address you as spiritual, but as worldly, mere infants in Christ. I give you milk, not solid food, for you are not ready yet for it. Indeed, you are still not ready. You are still worldly, for since there is jealousy and quarreling among you, are you not worldly? Are you not acting like mere men? For when one says, I follow Paul, and another, I follow Apollos, are you not mere men? What, after all, is Apollos? And what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task. I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. The man who plants and the man who waters have one purpose, and each will be rewarded according to his own labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. I'm going to stop there and focus on two or three things here. The first thing is that it's God's work, and God is the one who is doing it. I've been reminded of this in so many ways in the last few days as I've been thinking about these issues. So oftentimes we think about God's will for our life, and really that's the wrong question to ask. It's not God's will for our life. It's God's will, period. Okay? God is at work, and God will continue to work whether we work with him or not. He will continue to do his work whether we follow his will or whether we don't. And so really God is at work, and he invites us to be at work with him. Let me give you a quick illustration. If you think about the story of Abraham in the Old Testament, the angel of the Lord came to Abraham one day on the way to Sodom. The angel of the Lord had already decided that Sodom was a place that was so wicked that he was going to destroy it. Abraham happened to be there, and God stopped to see Abraham on the way to give him some good news. And at this particular point, he told Abraham, you know, I'm going to destroy Sodom. And Abraham said, wait, my nephew Lot is over there. Would you destroy it if there were 40 good people? And you know the story. The point of it is that God was working. God had something in mind long before he came to Abraham. And Abraham was there and a participant in this, and God destroyed Sodom. Abraham was really irrelevant to God's work. And that, in a sense, is really like us. God is working. He's doing his work constantly in the world. And we are there, and we can become participants with God's work. And that's exactly what Paul says here. He says, neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow. God is the one who does the work. God is the one who makes things happen. The man who plants and the man who waters have one purpose. Each will be rewarding according to his own labor. For we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. As we think about this, then, it's important to realize that it's not what God's will is for our life. It's what God's will is. And the issue is, are we willing to be fellow workers with God? And as we look at the question that I have for tonight, which is working the network, and my lecture focuses on this issue of working the network, it's really important to remember that we're partnering with God. And if we're not following God in this whole process, then it really is not going to make any difference. I can go out and I can recruit people to work with me. We do it all the time here at Biola. We recruit faculty and staff every year to work with us. But if we're not really partnering with God in this, if we're not following God's direction and God's work, we'll get the wrong people. We'll get people that really don't fit. We'll basically do our thing, and we really won't accomplish what God wants us to do. So as we think about the subject tonight, using friendships, using patron-client relationships, using the social structures that are there for ministry, you have to keep in mind, if you use it for your end, it'll be a bust. And you know, the purpose of this passage of Scripture is to help us to see that right off the bat. We need to be asking the question right from the start, is God working? And is God working in the people that I'm in touch with. And if we don't see God working in those people, then we probably don't want to trust them, to invest them with anything that's related to the ministry that God has called us to do. It really has to be God at work in us. Paul knew that Apollos was touched by God. Paul knew that Apollos was moved by God to follow him. And when Apollos didn't understand all the right doctrine, Paul and Priscilla and Aquila taught Apollos what was happening. And Apollos was very receptive, and he responded. And apparently he was a very eloquent speaker. And so Apollos was part of the work of God. And so Paul was happy to work with him. There were other people that Paul was not happy to work with. And he warns his friends, don't work with these people. They oppose the work of God. And that's really important to understand. God is at work, and God will keep on doing his work. And we're invited to be co-workers, fellow workers with him, and that's really the key thing. So often in my life I've thought, you know, Lord, what is your will for my life? And I realize it's the wrong question. What I really need to ask is, God, what is your will? And how can my life become a co-worker, a fellow worker with you in the work that you're doing? And another thing that I'm learning, and it's taking me a long time, is to keep on reflecting on what God is already doing. And asking myself each day, where is God at work? What is he accomplishing? And how can I be a part of his work in the things that he wants to do? I had an experience just on Tuesday night that I want to share with you. I was invited to go up to the U.S. Center for World Mission and give a lecture in a Perspectives on the World Christian Movement course. And I've done many of these lectures. And so, you know, it was a long day, and I have to leave at 6 o'clock and drive up to Pasadena. And, you know, I'm taking this, one more job, you know, one more job. And by the time I get there and sit down in the classroom, I have to wait another half hour while I go through the preliminaries to get started. And I'm just sitting there thinking, oh, well, you know, got my notes, I'll do my thing. And then a man gets up who is sharing about a ministry that's happening in Moldova. And they pull out the Operation World, and they pull up the pages that talk about prayer requests in 1993. And in 1993, Patrick Johnstone asked that we pray that there would be a seminary to teach new believers to prepare leaders in Moldova. Well, sitting right there next to me was the dean of that seminary from Moldova, and two pastors that are involved in church planning in this country. And they get up and they share the incredible things that God is doing and how God is working in Moldova to send out missionaries across the old Soviet Union. And so here are not only churches being planted, but churches sending out missionaries. And I'm sitting in this room thinking, man, God is at work here, and I'm a spectator. How can I be a participant in what God is doing in this place? And that's really the key thing that I want to share with you tonight. God is at work, and we can end up being spectators, just sitting around watching. And that was the attitude I came to that lecture that night. You know, oh, I'm just doing my thing. Hey, that was a really important moment because I had a chance to join in God's work, to be a participant with him in helping people to catch a vision for a dying world and for unreached peoples and for sending out missionaries and being missionaries in that context. And all of a sudden, my whole evening turned into a very exciting time with God because I realized I was part of what God was doing that evening in that place. I think that we are living in some of the most unusual times in the history of the world. One of my friends says that the Spirit of God is moving across the world today in ways that we really cannot comprehend. And he says, the one thing that I'm concerned about is that I want my sails to be up because I want to catch the wind of the Spirit of God, and I want to be moving with God. And I think that's really a key issue for us tonight. As we look at this lecture, we look at the stuff in it, there are technical things that we're going to discuss, and they're about relationships. But the key central part of everything that we're doing is the Holy Spirit is working. God is at work. And we need to work in partnership relationship. We need to have friendships. We need to understand how they work. Because if we don't, we have conflicts with people. But the most important and central part is that God is at work. And as Paul was saying here to these people, we need to deal with the conflict and put this behind us. Because it doesn't matter whether Apollos is greater or Paul is greater. It's not who's first and who's second. We're participants together in the work of God. One of the reasons why I teach about social organization is because I see people all over the world in conflict with each other. I see missionaries in conflict with nationals. I see nationals in conflict with nationals. I see evangelists in conflict with other evangelists. And it's not the things that we want to happen. But this is not new. Paul said it was going on right here in Corinth. And these verses talk about it. I would not address you as spiritual, but as worldly, mere infants in Christ. I give you milk, not solid food, for you're not ready yet. Indeed, you're still not ready. You're still worldly, for there's still jealousy and quarreling. There's constant jealousy and quarreling in the community of the body of Christ. It happens everywhere in the world. It happens in my church, probably happens in yours, happens in relationships between Christian workers. It's part of what we do. In looking at the subject for tonight, networks, patron, clients, and friends, I'm going to be looking at the kind of issues that are part of structuring those networks and some of the things that bring about jealousy and quarreling. And the important thing for us to remember is that we can work through those things, and it's important that we do because we're partners together in the work of God. And it's the work of God that is central, and if we don't get with God's work, God's going to leave us behind. In fact, we're just going to be left out. And that's what happened to some of these Corinthian people. They were just left. God left them to their disputes, and he went on accomplishing his work with other kinds of people. So we have that choice. We can be partners with God and be about his work, or we can be in conflict with one another and get left behind and be unable to be effective servants of the Lord in the work that he has for us to do. But let's pray together and let's ask God to give us direction and wisdom as we look at our material for tonight. Our God and Father in heaven, I just thank you tonight that you have been working. You were working at the time when Paul wrote this letter to Corinth. You are still working today. You were working at the time of Abraham, and you're still working today. Lord, I thank you for just making that so evident to me on Tuesday night. And Lord, I thank you for helping me to realize that I could just go about my work as routine, or I could begin to think about what you're doing and get with your program and be a significant participant in the work of God. I thank you, Lord, that you challenged me with that issue. And Lord, I pray that we together might be challenged tonight as we look at patrons, clients, and friends and see how we can work in relationships with one another in such a way that you will be glorified and that your name will be honored. It's in Jesus' name we ask it. Amen. Okay, working the network. As we think about this subject tonight, I've described for you we're going to be talking about patron, clients, and friends. And in thinking about this subject, we start with the issue of vision. I want to emphasize that the people of God respond more to vision than they respond to anything else. We can beat them and say, hey, you're not good people, you're not doing God's work. We can admonish them. We can pound the pulpit and shout at them. But really, it's vision that motivates people. It's the sense that there is a purpose, that God is calling us, that he's doing something. And I could even sense as I was sharing with you the fact that God is at work, that excites us. We begin to think about that. We begin to, well, what is God doing? And as we begin to look and see what's God doing, and we begin to get attuned to that, then we get motivated and we get excited in a new and special way. And so it's really important for us to be able to share with people what God is doing. And if we do that, God will move their hearts. And that's really what Paul is telling us in this 1 Corinthians 6 chapter that we've looked at. It's God who moves the heart. It's God who is the one who motivates people to participate with him in the work. Prayer is an important part of this. It's central, as we talked about last week. We need to be continually asking God to show us what he's doing and asking God to show us the people that he's already at work in. And if we ask those two questions, then God is going to answer our prayers. He's going to show us what he's doing. He's going to show us the people that he's working in. And that will enable us to then go about the work that he's called us to do. Now, as we think about this network idea, how to work the network is really the subject that we're reflecting on. And there are a number of different kinds of relationships that you have in networks. we're going to talk about the patron-client relationship first, then we're going to talk about the friendship relationship. There are other relationships besides those. There are kinship relationships. There are relationships of employment. There are relationships of social structure and status. We've been looking at those things pretty much as we've traveled through the course to this point. So tonight we're going to look at the special kinds of relationships that constitute friendships, and friendships that involve some kind of exchange. The unique thing about the patron-client relationship is that it's an exchange relationship. It's what we call a lopsided friendship. It's a friendship in which one person is on top, superior, the other person is on the bottom, inferior. But it's not a negative superior-inferior relationship. It's one where it's just recognized this is the way it's structured, and there is an exchange that goes on between them. The patron is considered to be the person who can provide help. The patron has more resources than the client. The patron can provide protection because the patron maybe has access to power. And so the patron relationship is one where that person has something that they can give to the person who is in the client relationship. The client, in contrast, is one who is in need of something. The client would like to have something that the patron has. The client would like help. The client would like some kind of protection. The client would like to have an ongoing relationship where if they have a need, they can come and get help. So the kind of relationship you see there is not necessarily a negative relationship in the sense of the patron being lord and master over the client. It's rather a relationship. Oftentimes the patron feels more used than the client, because the clients can make a lot of demands on patrons, and they can become very, very draining on a patron in a patron-client social setting. So the client isn't really much economic use to the patron. The client usually gives honor. The client shows respect. The client is loyal. The client gives what we call intangible assets. Those are the kind of things that are prestige and respect and support, but they're not something that you can put a dollar amount on. Information might be something that a client would give. Political support in a context where there may be a political ambition on the part of the patron. So as you think about the patron-client relationship, it is an exchange relationship. And if you think about transactions, we've talked about them earlier, it's one in which there is an exchange of two different kinds of things. The patron gives economic aid and support and protection, whereas the client primarily gives back respect and esteem and political support, information, the kind of things that you can't necessarily put value on. Now what's interesting is, as I think about patron-client relationships, oftentimes mission organizations and missionaries are clients, but they don't recognize it. And this can become a very important problem for them. Because you come into a country, let's take Kenya, because we're going to go to Kenya in just a minute, and you would like to work with the national church or with the national organization. And you come in and you say, I'd like to cooperate with you. The national organization will immediately see themselves as in the patron category, and you're the client. But if you're not used to thinking in that way, you don't see yourself as a client, you maybe see yourself as an equal. But they probably won't look at you as an equal because you're asking for a favor. And in their cultural situation, the asker is inferior to the giver. It's just the way it's structured. So if you're going to ask, you're low. If you're going to give, you're high. So if you're coming in and you have a lot to give, and they're asking you for something, then you're the patron and they're the client. But if you're asking them for something, if you're asking them for access to their community, if you're asking them for their political support, if you're asking them for the opportunity to work in a particular place, then you are actually in the client position, and you owe then the kind of respect and honor that a client has to give. So as you think about these kind of things, it's important to realize that if a society operates on patron-client relationships, you need to figure out what your position is. Are you the patron or are you the client? And if you're the patron, then you have one kind of responsibility. If you're the client, you have a different kind of responsibility. Now, at this particular point, I'm going to stop, and I'm going to ask James to come up here, and we've got a microphone for you, James. I'm going to ask you to share with us a little bit about your experience with the patron-client role in your homeland. Ah, there's the necktie. Well, it probably will. Okay?
Okay.
We can first of all start maybe with, you can go ahead and sit down there. We'll start with the notion of, to what extent do you find patron-client relationships in your home community?
First of all, patron-client relationships has permeated so much of the African daily life, and particularly this time the Akamba, the people that I come from, my own tribe. And it goes in the church, it goes also in the workplace, in leadership structures, and in the home environment. Now, as I was growing up, I saw father, son, or parent, children as patron client. Parents or father and son, father is the patron, and the son is the client. The father, for example, using the example of myself and my father, father has land, and no child has access to land. And you've got to do whatever it takes to have a piece of that land without buying. They have cattle, they have wisdom. Fathers have a lot of wealth that when you are close to them and when you do what you are supposed to do, they can support you in marriage, particularly with bride wealth, because you cannot raise all of those goats alone or cows or whatever. And a son is expected to give some respect, honor, and does things. And I like the intangible things because there are many. It's a conglomerate of collection of many things that really are indirectly or indirectly related to honoring, respecting the patron, because he has resources that you do not have. And so we can also give gifts in accordance with our abilities. And one of the gifts that is not respected is when a patron, a father or an elder sends you, you go running and you come quickly. You give them a gift of your time, a gift of your willingness to serve them in that respect, even obedience. Now, because when they will be evaluating, they would say, James is an obedient, cooperative man, so give him whatever he is looking for without questions. And
as you look at this, James, you start with thinking about this in relationship to your household and your family.
yes,
And what you've described between the father and son is exactly the kind of thing I've described in looking at the patron-client relationship. So how does this play out then in the church community in which you participated in?
Yes, surprisingly, it is transplanted into the church community because the elder pastors and leaders take the patron, and the young pastors, the newly trained women and men, become clients because we do not have the experience and probably the knowledge. That's what the elderly say, you lack knowledge. And so when we come in, they are the ones that usher us into the structure of leadership and the ministry as a whole. They introduce us into the church. For example, take a district church council. It's the one that employs us. When you go there, they are going to send you wherever they want. And you are not going to say, no, 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 that's a small church. In fact, they would like to send you to a small church to test you. So it is a conscientious, conspicuous kind of activity.
They want to know if you're going to respect them and honor them in the assignment they give you.
Yes, and they will look at your response. Are you going to say, yes, I'm going? And when you go there, are you going to say, they sent me to a bad place? Or you are going to say, I'm sent here and we are going to work together. And they did that to me. When I graduated, they took me to a church that had a lot of dissensions, a lot of fightings. And when a pastor was sent there, they came and beat him up. He ran away. And because the elders and the church was tough. They said we are orthodox. We don't kind of heed to any new teachings.
Mm-hmm.
So they sent me there. I did not know. And I went there. I found the elders were just coiled. We went to the first meeting. They were coiled. I tried to probe them and to encourage them to participate. They were coiled. And then one of the elders asked me...
What do you mean they're coiled? Like a snake to bite you?
I mean they did not want to open up.
Okay.
They were not vulnerable enough so that I may know them and really come to one spirit.
Okay.
Coiling, they were withdrawing information.
Okay.
They were hiding information from me, so I was alone. I was floating until one elder asked me, okay, we hear that, and I've been already initially introduced to them, and the council had given me to them. One elder said, we hear that you are going to be our pastor. They hear.
Yes.
Now tell us today, which is greater, the Bible or the Africa Inland Church Constitution? Oh my.
That's your first challenge, right?
That's my the first day. I looked at it, I said, God help me. I need you now more than ever because I do not know, I do not have the wisdom because they already know that I do not have the wisdom.
Yes.
Even if I have. It's an assumed thing. So
how old were you at that time?
oh my Lord, this was 80. Subtract from 53. I don't know.
So you were probably about 30 years old?
Close to that.
Yeah, a little younger maybe.
Very young. You are not an adult in front of the gray-haired elders until you are 50 or something like that.
Sure.
And raised children and gotten married,
Yeah.
you know. But I looked at it and I said, oh yes, this is easy. I told them, this is what I believe. Before the Constitution was God and the Bible. And the Constitution must heed to the Bible. If the Constitution is to gratify men, they are wrong. If the Constitution reflects what the Bible teaches, we are right. And I saw elders stand up and say, yes, thank you, welcome. And so that's how I began my ministry in that place. So I was really a very highly tested client in this case. And I came in because of my responses.
Let me stop you for a minute because this is an interesting problem. Here you have a pastor who's been appointed to be a pastor in a place who's really in a client role. He is the client for the district council, and he really is a client to the elders in the church in many ways because he's still in his 20s. These are men in their 50s or older, and he has to respect them and show honor to them in this cultural structure where the elders are like the fathers and the younger are like the sons, and the sons have to show respect and honor to them. So if you can see that it's really a dilemma to be a pastor in a context like that. How is it that you can serve in a pastoral role and recognize that you are subordinate to other senior pastor elders and subordinate to an elder group that is part of the board in a congregation, and walk in a way and teach in a way and preach in a way that honors the Lord and serves Him in that context? So it creates a special problem, and this problem is not unique. One of the reasons why I wanted James to tell you this story is that so often in the world we equip young people to go in and do ministry because they're easily educated, they can study and learn what we want to teach them in school, and they can go back into a community. But invariably they go into a community as clients and not patrons. But if we don't teach them that in our preparation, we don't equip them then for entering a community in a subordinate role of leadership.
Correct.
Okay, if you can think about that, a subordinate role of leadership. And this is the dilemma that he has. He has to go in as leader who submits. Okay. And this first test was an interesting test. You know, it has more ramifications that we probably don't have time to discuss tonight. But if you think about this issue, then one of the reasons why James was effective in doing this is because he was trained in a school where he had the same role to play in the school. There were other elders in the school who taught him to take a subordinate role in reference to his elders. And that pattern was one he carried from the school right out into the community.
Teacher-student.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So the elders or the local pastor, elders and the district church leaders are the patrons. And here, in this local situation, I had to be a client to survive. Because I knew the Bible, I knew many things, but I had to yield enough because I did not have social skills. And the spiritual skills, particularly in integrating that which I have learned in a theological institution with what is in the field, what goes on in everyday life. I did not know this church was fighting with the DCC, District Church Council, because they came with the authority of this is our constitution. Instead of coming and saying, this is the Bible, the Word of God. So this church leadership was right. And when I came and made a statement that showed that I was on their side, then the gateway was opened for me to enter. So I became a member in their church, although I was the pastor. So when I came, it took me some time then for them to test again whether my statements are true, that I would take the Bible as the authority, not the council that brought me in. And you know, this is conflicting, because I have to salute the council that brought in me in, and that employs me. And here is a church that now is going to test me on the very statement I made, that the Bible is greater than the Constitution, and therefore what the council resolutions that they pass every time are. So I had to balance. Because I must live and I must minister. So what happened was, when they discovered that I was a nice working man, and again I had no wife, and that was a defeating factor, because you've got to have a family, to have some experience. I was young. I needed God the most. And so I succeeded in that in the local church and with the elders. And because of that, I stayed in that church for 5 years. The church, the regional church council, wanted me to go and teach in a theological institution again because of the success in that local church that we had. But the church said, we will keep James too. We don't care if he comes every Sunday. And I fought with them to tell them, I don't want to do this kind of ministry, because you need a pastor every day. They need me on that other area. I also want to teach, but you need a pastor. They said, no, we don't want another pastor. So what I did was, now I had become a little bit of an equal. They listened to me. And what I did was, I wrote a letter to the district church council and said, my local church is not willing that I leave. Please, will you intervene and do this? So they helped me get out by sending a pastor, although he stayed only for 6 years, and 6 months, and he could not stay for longer, which made me feel very, I had a lot of feelings for that. But what do you do? So the young pastors are clients, women and men, the elderly, the well-experienced with life and with the ministry and the social skills of how to deal with people and leadership are the patrons. And it's a hierarchy of patrons, because the local church council are clients to, in fact, the district church council becomes client to local church, because the local church produces the money.
Okay.
And it goes through the chain. So the district respects the local church authority, and the local church authority respects the district, because the district will give them the pastor that they want.
Okay. There's a reciprocity going on there that we're going to talk about as we go on a little bit further. Do you want to talk about this in any other context beside the church?
Again, in the teacher-student it is the same. The teacher has wisdom and knowledge and education, and the student is the client. He wants to do things that will help the teacher release the knowledge and the skills without problem. Because in our culture, wisdom is a skill or a treasure that if you don't know how to go about it, it can be hidden.
Okay.
You don't just dispense wisdom that way. You need to go around it so that you may receive it. And much of it is honor. I remember those days when my parents used to give me a bottle of milk just to take to the teacher so that he may have tea in the morning. And that was a gesture from the parents. You are helping my child and enjoy the milk directly from the cows.
Okay.
And we are also concerned about your life as a teacher. And that played a lot. So in our culture, there is the perpetuation of this patron-client. If the young behave well to the old, they also say, we bless you, so that you will receive the same, even when you grow up.
Okay. Thank you, James. I'll ask you to come back in a few minutes.
Correct.
So if, but we better unhook your microphone. I'll ask you to come back in a few minutes and we'll talk a little bit about friends. But I'd like to just debrief for a minute now the issue of the patron-client relationship. In thinking about this, as we look at teaching in non-Western settings, very oftentimes the teacher may have a role like the patron role that James has talked about. In fact, one of our doctoral graduates, Delbert Chin-Chen, finished his EDD here a few years ago, did his whole doctoral dissertation on patron-client relationships in African schools. And in that dissertation, he focused on the fact that so oftentimes the students see the teacher not just as a teacher, but as a father, as a member of the family, as a patron. And so the student will develop a relationship with the teacher that expects from the teacher then father-patron kinds of exchanges. And for somebody coming from outside of that culture, they really don't know what the expectations are, don't appreciate the kind of exchange relationships that are going on there. If you're interested in that, you should take a look at Del Chin-Chen's dissertation on patron-client relationships. I think you'll find it a very valuable resource. Did I give you an assignment from that in this reading tonight? I thought I had put that on here. And that's something that you can follow through and read more about if you'd like. Now, I want to just make a couple of more comments about this. In the situation James described, he was put in an unusual place as a young pastor. There was conflict between the church and the district council. And this conflict was unresolved. And so when he came in the pastor's role, both of them expected him to be subordinate to them. That was a very difficult role to play. And to be able to be subordinate to both groups but somehow mediate the conflict between them was a very important part of his ministry. And part of his success was that he was effective in doing that. In essence, what he did is he brought peace back to a relationship of conflict like the one Paul described in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. In other words, there was disputing in the church, and there were conflicts that James walked into, and it was a very difficult situation. But by God's grace and the wisdom that the Lord gave him, he was able to be a client to both of those groups, and through that also be a mediator that brought them together and helped him to emerge as a true leader in that context. David. Oh, yeah, no, go ahead, ask.
Just want to ask James about what kind of church authority structure in your church or in your denomination. Because as far as I know, talking about pattern and client, in terms of well, actually we have three, right? Structure. The first one is, we call it Presbyterian model, and the second one is Episcopal, and the third one, the last one, is what do you call that? The congregational. So I don't know what kind of church authority structure you have in Kenya.
Let me give you two observations. Number one, ours is a chain authority. And we come from an heritage of a combination of many denominations. The Africa Inland Mission is the one that brought gospel to us in 1895. It began in my own tribe's land. And there were, Peter Cameron Scott was from Scotland. And we had people from America. After he died of malaria, we had people from America that came and followed his
And Scott would have brought the Presbyterian model.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. And we had Baptists. We have what is?
Do you have any Anglicans? Or?
No, Anglican is something else.
Okay.
Baptists, it would fall into Baptists and Presbyterian, and I don't know any other, those categories. And even when I go to a Baptist church, I see the practice that my church and our mother or father mission agency practiced, AIM.
The council structure that he describes looks similar to Presbyterian.
Okay.
In other words,
it's really obviously that you have a model of pattern and client. But in my case, in the past about 15 years as a church leader, I saw that my church is not clear. I mean, I can be a pattern, but I can be also a client as well. Because my denomination tend to be a what do you call that? Episcopal.
Okay.
Model.
Okay. Okay, with a bishop hierarchy?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, there is a bishop in James's system, but the bishop is part of a council, right?
He's part of the council.
And he's under the council.
And he can be fired by the council.
Okay. So the council really, that's why it seems to be Presbyterian. In the Anglican or the Episcopal type government, the bishop is the top. Whereas in the Presbyterian type government, the council is on the top. And
the bishop here is on the top and using the granted power.
Okay.
I mean, using granted power model, yes, the council says now go at the top. But he cannot stand there and pass things alone without the council's approval.
Right.
He is the chairman or the leader of the Executive Central Church Council.
Okay. Now, David's question is a good question because what you're saying is that all of these things are really culture specific, and you're absolutely right. See, and so this is just an illustration of how patron-client relationships may play out in another cultural context. But of course, in the context that you're working in, it's variable based upon the fact that you have a different kind of church structure. And there will also be local culture structure. And we're going to come to that in our second lecture tonight. We're going to come and look at the different kinds of structures that we have again and reflect somewhat on those issues. Let me just move on here. You can just lay it down there, that's fine. And look at two other issues related to patron-client. I'd like to go on to friendship then before our time runs out. One of the things we want to ask is, does our contact, the person we're working with, have the power to provide aid and to locate workers for us? In other words, can this person truly be a patron? If we were to be talking to James as a 28-year-old pastor, he really is not going to be capable of providing any aid for us or locating workers for us. He's going to have to go to his local church council. The elders are going to have the authority. And so one of the things that you need to recognize as you go into another community is that your relationships may or may not be able to help you. The kind of needs that you have may have to be found through someone else. And so whatever your local contact might be, let's say that I had developed a friendship with James when he was young, and I come into his community and I want the support of the church. James can't get that for me. But what he can do is take me to the church council who could. And so one of the things you want to ask a person is not can they help you, but can they lead you to help? In other words, can they take you to the people who could provide the help for you? In looking at patron-client relationships, it's important to understand that individuals who we may have contact with may be bridges to the relationship we need, but they not be able to do it themselves. The other thing that I want to mention is the issue of strategy. As you're working in network, as you're trying to work with people, there are a number of different kind of possibilities that you would face. And in thinking about this, you have to adjust to whatever cultural situation you're working in. If we followed the case study that James is talking about, we'd work one way. But if we went to work with David in Indonesia, we would have to learn from him how the local community works, what are the kind of relationships that occur in the church. If we want the church support, who do we have to go to? And can you help us get to those persons? And David might tell me, well, we really need to go to the bishop, but I can't take you to the bishop because I don't have any relationship with him. All I can do is I can take you to the local church leader who might have a contact with a bishop. And so you then will have to be content to work through the steps because the person that you're working with may not be able to take you to the person that you need to talk to. This was certainly true when we were working in Suriname and trying to develop the support of a particular church in Suriname that was part of the Sranan Tongo language group. That particular language had several major churches in it. It included the Roman Catholic Church, it included a Methodist church, and it included a middle-class Moravian Brethren church. And if all of those churches were going to support the Bible translation project, you had to get to the leaders of each of those churches. Well, there was a Catholic bishop and there was a Methodist bishop. And what my friends in the missionary organization told me was that they didn't have contact with either bishop and they didn't know how to get contact with those bishops. And so one of the things that I told them was that what we have to do is we have to start, who are your contacts? Let's meet those contacts. Let's find out from them how you make a contact with the bishops. Because until the bishops are on your side for the Bible translation project, you don't have any support. You have to have the bishop support in the Catholic and the Methodist denominations. So the issue then is, how do you connect with the patron and what things are necessary for you to get to that relationship? Now I want to come back again to the issue of God's work. And that is, if God is not working to make that happen for you at this time, you'd better wait and let it go until God is working. And what you want to do then is you begin to pray and you ask God, God, what are you working on and when do you want to bring support for this ministry that I have? And how will you show me the right people that will take me to the place where I want to go? And you have to begin to ask the Lord to bring into your life the kind of people and opportunity in His time and His way that will lead you in the direction you want to go. That will then require two things, prayer and watching and listening. Okay? You're going to have to be continually watching and listening for God to bring somebody into your life who can lead you to the bishop, to put it simply. In other words, and you then trust God to do that for you. If you try to do it yourself, if you get to the bishop, it won't work. You hear me what I'm saying? Yes. You can get to the bishop by your own method, but if you do, it won't work. You know, you can only get to the bishop by God's method, and it will work. It has to be the Lord doing the work for you. If you're really involved in the Lord's work, if you make it happen in your own way, you're wasting your time. You will not accomplish your purpose. And so oftentimes, in my own ingenuity and being a social tinkerer, I try to make it happen with my own way. I try to figure, okay, if I work this network, will I get it? If I work that network, will I get it? You have to be aware of networks, and you have to know that you're going to network, but you have to let God lead you to the people you're going to network with. Because if you make it happen your own way, the door won't open, and you won't accomplish the work that God wants you to do.
The other factor is that God works through channels. Mm-hmm. And although they are man-made, He is going to use that as a vehicle of leading you into what you want to do. Yeah. And with that in mind, I remember of a missionary that was brought to our church by just people. They met a missionary here in America, and they said, our church can, you can find it easy. And they thought they had authority. Mm-hmm. But when they came there, the missionary was left alone.
Mm-hmm.
The people that brought her went away.
Mm-hmm.
The bishop and the office, they did not have background of this person. So the person faced a burnout there in the middle of everything until a kind, compassionate pastor in the community took the missionary there just to work in the local church situation. So
the application of your story is what?
the application of my story is the channels are very important.
You have to go to the right channel.
Yes.
And you have to be sure the right arrangements are made.
Yes, before you just jump into the pool.
Okay. Very important. A very, very important point. And if you try to go ahead without using the right channels, and if you try to open them without God opening them for you, then you're going to have trouble. It's not going to work. James is right. It's important to know there are channels, and you have to have the right ones. And my point is that you have to access them through God's purpose and through God's people. Because if you access them otherwise, then it's not going to work for you. But you can pray and ask God to, knowing this, and you're watching and listening, God will show you the way into those channels that will accomplish His purpose. David?
I just want to give comments on the church as an organization, because we always concentrate on the church as an organization, but never as an organism.
Mm-hmm.
No. As far as we concentrate on that term, there is always a conflict, whether you are Presbyterian or Episcopal or whatever.
Sure.
But we always stick on the church is an organism. It's a body of Christ.
And if we see it as the body of Christ,
Yeah.
then we begin to work following the Lord in
Right.
this instead of following our
That's the
organizational
pattern.
conflicts.
Right.
Yeah. Good, good. Okay, let's go on and look at the friendship issues. We have a number of significant things that we need to talk about here. On friendship, there are three kinds of friendships that I want to talk about tonight. The first one is what we call a clique friendship. A clique friendship is really a network of mutual support. Clique in the English language has a negative connotation. It means that you exclude other people and you are an inward-looking group that doesn't like others. But actually, cliques in our sense are groups of people that help each other out. And they communicate with each other, and they provide support for one another in an organization. So it's a youthful kind of friendship. In other words, it's a mutual support network. It's people that work together to help each other out in an organization to make their life and work more smooth. And those kind of friendships you'll find all over the world. You'll find them in your churches, you'll find them in your communities, you'll find them in non-Christian communities, you find them in your jobs. They tend to be groups of people that just find that they can help each other out, and they become then a clique. If you were to come up to my office on the upper floor of Metzger, you'd find that the secretaries up there have a little clique. Now, it's not that they exclude others, it's just that they communicate with each other. They help each other out. When somebody's sick, they step in and care for one another. They have coffee together on Friday morning, and every Friday they bring somebody prepares something special for a snack. And so it becomes kind of a little group of associating where they help each other out. Now, other people look at that around the university and they say, well, that's a clique, and they're uppity people because they're in Upper Metzger. But it's not really what's going on. It's they help each other, and in that mutual help, it becomes then a relationship that becomes a little closer than they may have with someone else. Okay, the second kind of friendship is what we call an emotional friendship. An emotional friendship is one that tends to be very intense and inwardly focused. An emotional friendship is one which says that you're my friend and I'm your friend and we won't have any other friends. We'll exclude everybody else out of it. This kind of friendship is a kind of friendship that you want to avoid if at all possible if you're in ministry. Because this kind of friendship actually keeps you from doing the work that God is calling you to do. This kind of friendship says you can't have other friends, you can't have other relationships. You have to focus your attention exclusively on me. Generally, this kind of friendship is one that produces jealousy. It tends to produce frustration, and oftentimes when those friendships are stretched and tested, they break up. They ultimately create conflict and frustration at the end. The third type of friendship I want to talk about is what we call an instrumental friendship. And this friendship is really the most helpful to us because it's a friendship in which there is what I call open trust and open credit. Now, as you look at open trust and open credit, the idea of open trust and open credit is the idea that I will share with you whatever I need and want, and you will share with me whatever you need and want. That we really can help each other out in a unique and special way. It's the kind of a friendship in which you trust each other so much that you're not worried about being used and misused. You are able to continue in this relationship in such a way that you're always eager to help each other out and always eager to support the other person in what you want to do. This kind of friendship is very, very important for people that are involved in ministry. It's the kind of a friendship that Paul had with Philemon. It's the kind of friendship that Paul had with Timothy and with Titus. It was a friendship where they really were just always eager to help each other out, always eager to share with each other, always willing to do what they needed to do to make the ministry happen. As we look at the kind of friendships, then what I want to suggest to you is that the friendship that you can promote in ministry relationships are instrumental types of friendships. You want to try to avoid the emotional friendships. Clique friendships are okay. There's nothing wrong with them, as long as people recognize that they can become focused too much inward and not really give attention to the ongoing aspects of the ministry. But the instrumental friendship is one that allows us to continue to build relationships with others. And one of the things I note here that I think is important is that instrumental friendships also sponsor relationships with others. In other words, you help people to connect with other people. And so while I have a relationship with James, I want to take that relationship and I want to introduce James to other people. And he will introduce me to other people, and we'll continue to sponsor our relationships with others so that we each can extend our friendships with others. That's the ideal kind of friendships to have in ministry. And if you can build those kind of instrumental friendships, they will be most helpful and valuable to you. I think we'll stop at this point and we'll take a break and then we'll continue on after the break. Okay, we're on page 60 in the syllabus, and I just want to complete a few comments on the lecture from the last hour, and then we'll move on to the lecture 18. As we were thinking about the network and friendships, there are a number of principles I think that are important in working with people that I would just like to emphasize as we conclude that section. And the first one is that we really need to work on trust. If people don't trust us, they're not going to be able to work with us. And trust is something that takes a long time to build. I talked about instrumental friendships in the last hour, and if you think about instrumental friendships, they're characterized by what I called open credit, open trust. Now, open credit means that I can give to you anything that you ask for and not feel that I'm going to be abused or misused, because I know that you will return to me all that I need back. That's what open credit is about. And that's an unusual kind of friendship where you can truly do that, where you know that the other person is not going to take advantage of you, where you know that that person will do everything they can to help you all that you need. And so it will be kind of an open credit relationship. The open trust part of that is one where you are willing to trust each other and can trust each other and to the fullest extent. In other words, again, that's part of the fact that because I know that you're not going to abuse my relationship with you, that I can trust you. Because I know that you respect me and I respect you and that we're really going to give our utmost to each other. I don't have many friendships that are like that. I've had those kind of friendships in my life. I remember particularly when I was working at the State University of New York, I had a friend, and truly we had open credit, open trust relationship between us. All of my tools were his tools. All of his tools were my tools. We would work together, and we worked on projects together. We never worried about one guy working more for the other guy than the other. We just were committed to each other, and we really helped each other out on all kinds of things that we did. If he was doing something at his house, I would go help him. If I was doing something at my house, he'd be there. And we had then things that we did together. We had projects together. It was truly an open credit, open trust kind of relationship. And that kind of relationship is really a valuable one that becomes just dynamic and powerful in terms of ministry, if you can have that relationship with people you minister with. Second thing that is important to think about is meaning. As people are motivated for ministry, they do ministry, they work with you in ministry because of the meaning in their lives. They don't do it because they're getting great rewards. In other words, when you think about this, it's the larger meaning of life that's more significant to us. Most of our faculty work at Biola for lower pay than they would get if they worked at another university. And so why are they working here? Why don't they go somewhere else for higher pay? Well, primarily because of the meaning of working here. That they're committed to a Christian education. They're committed to equipping people in mind and character to make a difference in the world for the Lord Jesus Christ. They're committed to biblically centered education. And because that meaning is so important to them, they're willing to work in a place like this for a lower economic compensation and do it because of the meaning. But if we don't help them keep that meaning in front of them, they lose motivation, they get discouraged, and they despair. David?
You're saying that you have an added value.
That's right. You have added value, the value of purpose, and your common purpose that you're committed to in Christ. So what that does, it compensates for the other value that you don't have. And what you'll find is that in ministry, people will oftentimes sacrifice greatly other kinds of values for the added value of the fulfillment of working for the Lord. I'll never forget the pastor in Suriname who said, we don't get paid anything for our work in the church. We're working for the Lord. And for him, that was enough. In other words, that was the pay. That was the meaning. That was the significance of what he did. So when we think about why we work together, trust is critical. We have to trust each other. If we don't, then we lose meaning. In other words, it becomes then an undermining and disturbing part of where we are. And the meaning is really the key that keeps us going. That's why I said in the beginning we start with vision. The third thing is economic. It's interesting as you look at this economic factor. Everybody wants to be treated fairly. And if for some reason they feel that this is not fair, then even though the meaning might be great, the economic variables can come in and undermine and create mistrust. We talked about conflict in the beginning. I don't know what caused the conflict back in Corinth, but it was clear that people were divided and they were in contest with one another, and it seems like they were divided over leadership. Some of them said, I'm of Paul, and some of them said, I'm of Apollos. And I wonder what were the other variables going on in that. Were there trust variables that entered into that situation? Was there some undermining of trust that we really don't have clearly before us? So oftentimes what I find in the conflicts that I found with Christian workers that I've consulted with in different mission organizations, that it often comes down to a sense of unfairness in regard to economic issues. They believe that one person has greater access to a resource that we all need than somebody else. That some people are being greedy about the use of resources that we have, and they're not being considerate of others. I heard this when I was on a trip a couple of years ago, and they complained about one particular family who always signed up the truck way in advance and signed it up more times than they should have. You know, the group truck. Well, that's unfairness. You know, it's the issue of somebody taking advantage. So there is a trust issue that's undermined, and there's also this issue of fairness. And as we look at these issues, these are things that really undermine the cooperative work of brothers and sisters in Christ. And so I guess what I'm sharing with you is this. If you really want to have effective ministry relationships, you have to always keep these things in mind, and you have to teach others that you're discipling to recognize the importance of trust, the power of meaning, and the importance of economic fairness and treating one another with respect in this area of our lives. If we miss this, then these seeds of dissension will just creep in, and they'll make us less effective in our work with one another. David?
I think that's a long way to go, because like me, and sort of my generation, is not a victim, but it's kind of fruit, that from which the seeds was planted by the earlier missionaries.
Mm-hmm.
Because the gospel reached to Indonesia is not from the Easterner, but mostly from Westerner.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of seeds they planted into our soils, that the fruits will become. So what I'm trying to say is, it is an ideal way. That is, I always teach them to stick on these three: trust, meaning, and economy. But again, there is a conflict, a big conflict among us, especially the church leaders in Indonesia, because they see as a fact, that let's say that the missionaries try to to establish not a kingdom, but there's a gap between the missionaries' life and our local life economy.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So I don't know.
What don't you know?
It's hard for me to say that, because this is what we face today. That we have to struggle, to make it straighten, I mean, we have to mobilize our local leaders, that this is the right one. This is our standard. So we can get something that is really positive from the missionaries' perspective, but not all of them.
Okay.
That's what you call it, unfairness.
Yeah, that's right. James?
I think also the receiving culture has to see the Westerner coming from another culture, the little economical gifts that he has. For example, let's say dollar. When it crosses the Pacific or an Atlantic, it increases. And if we can understand this missionary at home, he is nothing, or rather he has little, then we cannot complain, because I had the same problem in my African context until I came here and I began to see what is happening. And I was complaining that the missionaries were going to Mombasa beach, where we cannot go because, number one, we don't have a car. Number two, we don't have anything to eat when we go there. And I was not understanding until I came and began to see the dynamics. I didn't know a dollar multiplies to 100-fold when it goes beyond the Pacific or Atlantic. But when I came into understanding, then I began to see, aha, I know now why my brother would have some surplus to do something that I could not do.
Okay.
It seems that I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that they want to westernize not our culture, but the entirely, what do you call that, a system, in my country. Again, that I don't want to blame them, but this is really like a highlight for us to know,
Okay, what do you see as a solution?
The crucial time, by the time they want to turn over from what do you call it, the period where they are there, and then turn over all the rights, everything to the local leaders. That is the crucial time. Because at that time, that will become an unfairness.
Okay, I still don't understand why it happens at that time.
Yeah, because they're not ready to lead the church. They're not ready to, what do you call that, to lead the organization. Because,
Well, I look at Paul spent 3 weeks in Thessalonica.
Okay.
And he left a church there. And he went on, and he never went back. Never returned to Thessalonica as far as the scriptures are concerned. He might have gone back once. But, in his ministry, there was no support to come back and help Thessalonica become a church. He sent Timothy back there to minister to those people and to encourage them and teach them. But most of the churches that Paul planted, he wasn't around to nurture them and to handhold them and to help them get to a place where they could lead the church. Basically, if those people didn't make it on their own, they didn't make it. And so I'm wondering what's different now.
Yeah, what I mean is, why don't they have a strategy, you know, before they turn over all the activities and organization to the local ones? Mm-hmm. Why don't they have what do you call that, a solid or like a package, you know, of strategy how to train the local leaders?
See, I can't answer that question for you because I don't know anything about the mission. I don't know anything about the church. Yeah. I don't know what their plans were. I don't know how they failed to carry out those plans. I mean, you're asking me a question that really I can't answer because I don't have any information about the case. What I can say to you is, yeah, that trust relationships were probably broken, that maybe they didn't deal with economic fairness in the way they should have, but I'm always guessing. I have no data upon which to analyze it. And basically what I'm suggesting to you here is that if you're in that position of responsibility, which is tomorrow, okay, then you have to do something differently. And what I'm suggesting to you is that you do need to give attention to trust, even if the missionaries who went before you didn't. You can plant new seed. You can be more effective in the job that you're called to do. We can continue to berate those who did things in the past that are wrong, but nothing of that can be changed. We're in a position now where we have the opportunity that's before us today and tomorrow. And if we know what we're doing and we take advantage of that opportunity, then we can deal with trust. We can deal with meaning. We can deal with the issues of unfairness. And we can work to try to make sure that these things are handled in a way that's honoring and glorifying to Christ. And that's my point. We could sit here all night and talk about people who failed us in the past. But that's not going to do anything for us tomorrow. And I think that our purpose is to look at what is it that will help us to be more effective tomorrow. Now let me go on. I want to talk a little bit about the tensions. You've picked up, David, some of the tensions that you're going to experience in this. One of them is factions. Factions grow out of conflict about leadership. And individual leaders emerge and try to take power in places. And when they do that, they divide the churches, they divide the people. If leaders do not work on concentrating, coming together, then inevitably they split things. And factions are one of the kind of tensions that you'll find in situations of ministry all around the world. It happens in local churches, it happens in denominations, and it happens in the leadership of denominations. The second area of conflict is what we talked earlier about cliques. These are when groups of people come together and they form interest groups, and then they divide against other groups of people, and they create divisions within a community. And that can be within a larger national community, it can be within a local community, it can be in a local church. The last one is one where you have an individual who is involved in self-interest and self-focus. Let me illustrate it for you this way. Let's suppose that James Mbuva decides that he needs to have a whole series of patrons, and so he works on making me a patron, and he works on making David a patron, he works on making Peter a patron, he works on making Faith a patron, and Julie and Annie, and all of you become James's patrons. Now what that means is he's the client of all of us. All right, if I ask, he's asking each of us for favors, and we're all helping him. Now there comes a time when we expect something back from him, and he can't do it because he's got too many obligations with too many people. And so what has happened is that he's got multiple sponsors and he can't pay back. In other words, that undermines trust. And oftentimes that's what happens when you're in a cross-cultural setting. You can get too many patrons, and then you can't sustain the commitment socially and in terms of your obligations to one another. And so it really places that person in a position of undermining trust because he's using his patrons and not really trying to provide support and a deep, meaningful relationship between them. And of course, that's one of the things that missionaries fear. They fear that there is a local person who is working all of them to get as much from them as they can, and their whole purpose is just to get something and not to be involved in ministry. So as we look at those things, those are different kind of tensions, and we'll go on. I want to move on now to the next lecture. I want to conclude in my section tonight, in the last part of this class, looking at worldview and the logic of social relationships. And as we think about this, the book that you had assigned for this evening by I'm blanking on his name now, on Morocco, okay? What's his name? Rosen, R-O-S-E-N, Rosen. All right, Rosen's book is an in-depth case study of relationships in the nation of Morocco. And it's a very good case study because it digs deeply into the complex variables that are part of how relationships are structured there. And Morocco is a unique and different setting because it's a dramatic contrast to what we've been looking at in Kenya all through the semester. It's a society and a culture in which most relationships are not fixed. You bargain for them. That's why the title of the book is called Bargaining for Reality. Instead of having a father-son relationship in which there are clearly defined roles, every son negotiates his relationship with his father, and the father negotiates his relationship with the son. Now that may sound strange to us, but in fact, the Moroccan culture operates that way. The whole idea of bargaining for reality means that they, in a sense, renegotiate every kind of relationship, and they continue to renegotiate those relationships through their life. Before we go into that particular case, I'd like to do a little bit of background, and one of the things I want to talk about is a little bit about how we think and how we create culture. The theory of culture that we're going to talk about is the fact that culture is something we create in our minds. And so if we look at this aspect of culture, human beings impose mental order on their experience. We actually impose it. There was an experiment done by an economist by the name of Herbert Simon at the University of Pittsburgh quite a number of years ago now. And I'm sorry, it's Carnegie Mellon University. And at Carnegie Mellon, he had a computer generate images on a television screen. And he then brought graduate students in to watch that television screen. And he said at the beginning, these images are random. They're randomly generated. And what I want you to do is look at them and tell me what patterns you see. Now, every student found pattern on those screens. And every student at the end of the experiment could describe the patterns that they saw. There were truly no patterns. It was randomly generated. But every student constructed patterns from that experiment as they looked at it over a period of about 10 minutes, actually. 10 minutes of observation. And each of them were able to analyze and describe the patterns that they had actually seen. Now, my point in this is that the images were not patterned. They were randomly generated by a random process on a computer television screen. But out of that, everybody found pattern. What is the application of that? What that means is that all of us are going to look at what's happening in our world, and we're going to find order in it. And we're going to define order in it. And whether that order is there or not, we will see it. Okay? So that should help us to be suspicious of ourselves. What we will look at is we will look at what we experience, and we will come to conclusions that these are the causes of what we have seen. And we will impose that on them, and there may be no relationship at all between what we think happened and what really happened. One of the things that I like to challenge students with is the notion of Paul's thought in the book of Romans, chapter 11, verse 32. God has given all men over to prisons of disobedience so that he might have mercy on them all. This notion of prisons of disobedience basically says that we all see our worlds through our own grid, and we impose our order on it, and this becomes a prison to us. And it becomes a prison in which we cannot see and act in accord with God's Word because we're in our prison. Now, that really brings me back to an issue that you raised with us just a few minutes ago, David, and that is the issue of why missionaries do what they do. They do what they do because they're in prison, their own cultural prison. And you too are in your own cultural prison, and you're going to do what you do out of your prison. You're going to see your world the way you see it. And as James said to us, he said, I saw those missionaries going to Mombasa, and it just didn't make any sense to me at all. and it seemed to me that they were just living extravagant lives. Well, now he's come here and he's lived in America for a while, and he doesn't have that same judgment anymore because he has seen something of another side of that life and where those people come from. So what happened? Did the people change? No. What happened was that James' knowledge and understanding of the situation changed, and the order that he gave it was different now. In other words, he redefines it in a different way. He interprets it in a different way because he's had other kinds of information that has come in. Now, he may still not be right. In other words, whatever conclusion he's reached, he may not be right because we continually reach conclusions on the basis of our observations, not because of what really is there, but because we bring to it what we bring to it. We bring to the situation our own understanding, our own worldview, and our own perspective. And so the consequence of that is that we interpret what we see on the basis of what we already know, not really on the basis of what's happening. In your interviewing with your informant, you're doing that. You're interpreting what you're hearing on the basis of what you already know. And so what you have to be cautious about is this really what's happening? Or is it just what I think is happening because of what I expect to be happening in this situation? And that's a difficult thing to always struggle with. That's why you continually try to cross-check yourself. That's why I would never tell you to use one informant if you went into another culture. I would tell you to use 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 8. Actually, the minimum would be 8 if you're going to do a project like this and really want to have some generalization. And then what I would want you to do is continually ask yourself, is my hypothesis wrong? Usually what we ask ourselves is my hypothesis right? If we ask it if it's right, we always find information to show that it's right. But if we ask, is it wrong, and we continue to try to reject it, then if we fail to reject it, we have probably pretty good evidence. Because this pattern of imposing order on our experience usually means that we look for evidence that supports what we believe, instead of looking for evidence that rejects what we believe. I've become so convinced that this is my habit that I try to ask myself the question, when I read the Bible, how does the Bible contradict what I think? Can I find something in this scripture that contradicts what I think? And I don't ask that question enough, because every time I ask it, I find that the Bible contradicts what I think. And you know, it's easy to go in and find something to support what you think. We all proof text our scripture that way. We go and find what we have this idea and say, hey, here, this scripture verse supports that, you know. Well, it may, but it may not. And if you ask, is there scripture that doesn't support that? Let me see if I can find scripture that doesn't support it. You'd be surprised how many you'd find. And so what that does is it helps us to check ourselves and to begin to ask what really is going on here. What is God saying to us? What's happening in the world around us? How can we understand what other people are doing? Now, I want to go on. Structure. What is structure? I'm going to define structure here in an unusual way. Structure is that which is out of control. Now, how can that be? Out of control. What does that mean? What it means is, if it's structure, I can't control it and you can't control it. It controls us. So, for example, it rained all day today here in California. None of you could shut it off. Okay? You had to carry your umbrellas. Okay? If you're going outside, you had to deal with the rain. The rain is out of our control. So it's an energetic structure. In other words, it's part of our world, and it happens, and we can't do anything about it. If it's hot, that's out of our control. If it's cold, that's out of our control. And we can't do anything about those variables. Now what we can do is we can try to put on clothing to keep warm when it's cold. We can try to take off clothing when it's too hot so we can get cool. We can sit in the shade, or we can get inside the house and close the door. Those are things we can do, but we're actually not controlling the structure. We're just adapting to it. Okay? So that's why structure is out of control. Energetic structures, like our environment, are out of our control. Mentalistic structures are also out of our control. And they are order imposed upon us by external events in human mentality. For example, our language. Our language is really out of our control. It's a structure that we use. So, for example, I'm speaking English to you tonight. Most of you speak another language. You have at least 2 languages. So those particular languages are structures that are out of your control, but you use them to relate to other people who use them as well. You can't decide arbitrarily that from now on we're going to reverse the grammatical structure of English. And we're always going to put the verb first and put the subject last. Or we're going to do like German and put all of the nouns and phrases at the beginning, put the verb at the end. If we did that, no one would understand you. And you could not communicate in English. So there is this language structure that's out of your control. There's a cultural structure that's out of your control. And again, this is part of how we work and relate to one another. Now, this then comes back to the problem that we have in our relationships with one another. I'll come back to David's comment earlier again about the church and the structures that are there. There are probably structures that are involved there that really were out of anybody's control. There were cultural structures that people brought with them. And as you said, there were seeds that were planted and then they came to growth and the fruits of them are there. And there are structural issues that are out of control. And in that sense, we've got a problem. But you gave us a clue in terms of how of dealing with that problem when you said we focus not on structure, but on organism. The church is an organism. The church is a body that works together. And I think that's the key that we'll come back to. But I want you to think for a minute about this notion of energetic, structural, and mentalistic structures as being parts of what is out of control for us. Okay, let's go on. Culture. Culture is the socio-economic order and the meaning shared by a collective people. Okay. Now, in thinking about this, I'm going to talk about economy, social game, and worldview. Economy comes from the energetic structures. Okay? We deal with labor and exchange in economy. Every economy has some kind of labor and some kind of exchange. And if it's an agricultural economy, then there's people working on the land, they're producing food, and they're involved in some kind of exchange either in families or in communities or in other kinds of relationships. If they are working in an industrial economy, then it's similar. You have another organization of labor, people working for wages, for people who own factories, who own shops, and then you have exchange going on because they earn money, and then they use that money to participate in the economy. No matter what kind of economy that you find, there will always be a structure of labor and a structure of exchange. Now, those structures tend to be mentalistic structures that are out of control. In other words, I can't go down to Lucky's and say, you know, I don't have any money today, but I'll give you my jacket for some beans. They'll say, sorry, we don't accept jackets for beans. I'll say, well, how about if I give you my shoes for some fruit? And they'll say, I'm sorry, I don't accept shoes for fruit. You have to have money. If you don't have money, you can't get anything here. So then I go over the street, just over the parking lot to Carl's Jr. And I walk into Carl's Jr. and say, I'm sorry, I don't have any money today, but please could I give you my jacket for a hamburger? And they're going to say, I'm sorry, we just don't give hamburgers for jackets. Could I give you my shoes for a hamburger? I'm sorry, we don't give you hamburger for shoes. Now, I'm being facetious, but the point of it is that the structure is out of my control. If I don't have any money, I don't get any food. And so you're in a position where you have to participate in the exchange system to get food. Now, if I were in James's village, and I went down to the village market, and I had on this nice jacket, and I went up to somebody there who had some nice yams, and I said, you know, I'd like to exchange this jacket for some yams. I might find a woman who'd exchange it because she'd say, hey, that'd be a nice jacket for my husband. And she might be willing to exchange that with me for yams. And in fact, she might think, hey, this is a real good deal. That's a nice jacket. And I could bargain and get maybe a lot of yams for my jacket. I can't do that in Lucky's. But I can do it in the market in his town because that kind of exchange rules, the rules of exchange there allow it. Whereas the rules of exchange in the Lucky's market do not allow it. So as we look at then the economy, it's got rules, it's got a structure, and you have to work within those structures to participate. Now, what James has described about missionaries going to Mombasa is part of that unique exchange relationship. You know, the missionary has a particular allowance, and the missionary saves up enough of that allowance so the missionary can go on vacation to Mombasa. And that's part of the culture of exchange that missionary works with in America. Whereas the Kenyan doesn't have that kind of economy. It doesn't have that kind of structure. And so the way he engages in labor and exchange gives him very different expectations of what he can do and how he can do it. Social game is the next point. The social game focuses on this particular structure of relationships. I told you before, there are 5 social games. 4 of them are truly social. One of them is the hermit. He's the dropout. But the other 4 are the individualist game, the authoritarian game, the hierarchist game, and the egalitarian game. I'm going to come back to those, but I gave you a handout at the beginning of the class to just illustrate those for you. So as we look at social game, every culture has within it this social commitment of some kind. They play at least one social game. Usually they play 2 or 3. And they may even play all 4 games. But each game is confined to a particular kind of activity and to a particular kind of place. So that's an important part of it. The third thing is the worldview, and that is the ideas, the ideology that really governs a culture. All 3 of these are very crucial variables in the culture, and we have to understand people as being participants in all of them. The interesting thing about them is they're all independent of each other. And what do I mean by that is that each one of them can change separately from the other. So, for example, the economy can change from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy, and the idea systems can stay pretty much the same. Or you can have, for example, you can have the worldview being a worldview that it focuses on Christianity or Islam, and either one of the people who change from an agricultural economy to an industrial economy can still be deeply committed to Islam. For example, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has incredible wealth based upon oil, but they still have a very deep commitment to Islam, to the ideology of Islam, to the practice of Islam in the culture, and even Islamic law and Islamic practice in their society. They dress very much like they did 100 years ago when there was no money. They view their world as having the continuity of the ideology that is there. The social game that they play is probably similar to the social game they played when they were a kingdom and not a capitalist economy. But the economy has changed drastically. So if you go to Saudi Arabia, you find the kingship that they had in 1800. You find the social games like they played it in 1800. You find their worldview very much like the worldview they had in 1800. But you find them having an incredible amount of money because of oil and the capitalist economy that they've adopted. So what I'm saying is the economy can change, and the social game and the worldview need not change. Likewise, the worldview can change. A Saudi can accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, become a Christian, and completely adopt a different religion and worldview. Then can come to America and begin to participate in the American economy. Or basically stay in Saudi and participate in the Saudi economy and participate in the same social game you did before. You can have the idea system change and the social games in the economy stay the same. You can also change your social game, and it doesn't necessarily change the economy or the idea system. For example, in Christianity, I may decide that I just really don't like the egalitarian game of the church that I grew up in. And so instead of being a brethren anymore, I join the Episcopal Church. And so I move from an egalitarian to a very hierarchical authoritarian structure. I've changed my social game, but I continue to have a Christian worldview and continue to hold the same kind of beliefs and many of the perspectives that I had that grew out of my egalitarian church denominational perspective. So in looking at these things, you can change any one of them without being involved in the other. Now, as we work toward understanding a little bit of the reading for tonight, I want to come back now to Rosen's book and Bargaining for Reality. As we look at Rosen's book, one of the things that Rosen focuses on is the fact that social identities can be negotiated. And if we think about this, let's talk first of all, what are social identities? Social identities are cultural labels. There are all kinds of cultural labels. You tell me, what are some of the cultural labels that you use in your ordinary life? Okay, let me ask you this. How many of you here think you're Korean? Okay, there are 4 of you. How many of you know you're not Korean? Okay, there are at least 3 of you that know you're not Korean. There's an identity. Okay, we've just defined it. Okay, how many of you know that you're men? Okay, there are several. How many of you know you're not? Okay, okay, that's an identity. Okay, those are identities. Now, what are some other identities that you have? Christian, okay.
Student.
Student, all right. What else?
Minister of the gospel.
Oh, I'm sorry?
Minister
of the gospel, okay. All right. Okay, Father, okay, sure, there are lots of them. These are identities that you have. Okay. Now, as you think about identity, what Rosen talks about is what is the content of that identity. And when you think about the content of that identity, what we're talking about is what does this really mean as you interact with other people. So, for example, what does it mean to be Korean? Okay. What does it mean to be a Kamba? Okay. What does it mean to be Pennsylvania Dutch, which is what I am? Okay. Does it mean anything? What goes into that identity as you hold it and as you deal with that, and how does it shape your life? See, that's important. So you're all working with people who have identities. James here is working with people at Cal State Fullerton who are international students. They all have different kinds of identities. What are the identities that they have? One of them is international student. Okay? And that's an identity they share. But there are a whole host of other identities, aren't there, James? Give me some of them.
Journalist. One.
Journalist?
Yeah. Their nationality, place Southeast Asian, self-supporting, as opposed to dependent on parents.
Okay. See, what he's pulling out is the things that are important to them. I'm self-supporting. Okay, that's an identity that the person has strongly holds. Okay, what else?
I speak English well.
Okay. I'm a good English speaker. So. Okay, the point of it is, you see, people are identifying themselves. They're saying, this is what's important about me. And the people he's working with, they have all signified there's something about themselves that they think is important. Being self-sufficient, being a good English speaker, something that they have strived for and that they want to have as part of their identity. Now, the identity of being a good English speaker is an achieved identity. The identity of being Japanese is one that you're born with. In other words, you could become a Japanese citizen and become Japanese, but you know, it's like David said last week, one of my problems of ministry is I'm Chinese in Indonesian culture. Okay? So when you have that identity as Chinese, that puts you into a relationship with others that's complex and creates all kinds of expectations that are difficult to deal with. Now the question is, are those identities negotiable or are they fixed? And that's really what Rosen brings into focus as he talks about this. Cultural labels which define potential relationships. As we look at potential relationships, we're saying that they're not fixed. And that's one of the things that Rosen talks about. If the relationship is potential, then you can fill the content. Whereas if it's fixed, it's not potential. It's ordered. In looking at this notion of potential relationships, he says in Morocco, father-son is a relationship that you can fill it with whatever content you want. In other words, there's a broad range of filler that can go into that. So it can be described. Swede and Finn is a potential relationship. How are Swedes in relationship to Finns? How are Muslims in relationship to Jews? Or specifically, how do Arabs relate to Berbers? And what Rosen says is that Arabs and Berbers negotiate the content of their relationships, that they can fill that relationship with whatever meanings they want. And so it's a negotiable thing. Contrast to that, you have a hierarchy of ordered social categories. The hierarchy means that the categories are ordered and they're fixed in their relationships and they're fixed in their content. So if we look at, my illustration here is from the island of Yap, which I've talked about a little bit before. They have three major divisions that they talk about in their society: spirit and human, elder and younger, and male and female. Those are fixed categories. They're very sharply bounded, and they're fixed content in those categories, and they're not negotiable. So, for example, women cannot do things that men do. Men cannot do things that women do. It's just taboo. It's anathema in their culture. They wouldn't think of changing roles. Women are not allowed to go out in the sea. They're not allowed to fish. It's absolutely forbidden. Men are not allowed to work in the places where women work. They're prohibited from going to the menstrual houses. There are just places and spaces which are denied to each of them in terms of how they live and work. So that's part of their definition of their world. There's a hierarchy of ordered social categories. Now, I would expect that James in his work at Cal State Fullerton is finding people that have social identities for which much can be negotiated. How well I speak English, how independent I am, all of those kinds of things are basically negotiable and content-filled relationships. Whereas from what David has described in his ministry, he cannot negotiate his Chinese identity. That is something that is always a label that he carries when he goes into a place, and they have some fixed ideas about what that means. And then how that, tell us a little bit more about it, David. How does that constrain you in your ministry?
As soon as they see the skin, they know that we are stranger. You know?
Okay. So you're defined as an outsider right away?
Yes.
Even though you're Christians and in the church?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
And the other thing is our features.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I have slanting eyes.
Okay, now how does that affect your ministry?
That it's very hard for them to accept us because, oh, you are Chinese, you belong to a Christian, something like that. So Chinese is identical to a Christian. So
Okay.
as soon as you get that they don't want to accept.
Okay. So in a Muslim context, to do evangelism, you're immediately suspect just because you're Chinese.
Yeah.
And it creates a barrier for you in terms of talking to people.
Right.
Now, is there any way that you can get beyond that? Have you found any successful way to bridge that barrier?
Yeah, in the past 8 years, I've been working among the poor people.
Okay.
So they like to get help, like support, you know. So I do the economic
Okay.
section, like micro enterprise projects. So like such as what do you call that? Relief and development program, something like that.
Mhm.
So all people accept that
Mhm.
because they need help.
Okay.
So whatever you are Chinese or they welcome us.
But the middle class wouldn't accept you.
The middle class, yes, they don't accept me.
Okay. Because they don't need you.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. So the open door then is to people who are poor and who are needy at that
Yeah.
point. Okay. Okay. Now that's an important thing to see. James?
Just a question for you. How about, since it's not physical, how about someone who could speak English well? Would they accept, even if you're Asian, if you speak English, if you're like a second generation Chinese from America, would they accept them, the middle class?
well, for the middle class, I think yes or no, and no, because at this moment, for Indonesian case, yeah, it's a few people can speak and understand English. So it's hard for them to welcome you.
Mhm. Okay.
But still there is a gate for you,
Okay.
you know, to be there.
All right. If we look at this, then we're really dealing with the Chinese category, in David's case, is an ordered category, and it's hierarchical. There is no flexibility in that, whereas with the Moroccan categories, there's potential. I'm going to come back to that in our conclusion. But let's go on and look at the issue of Moroccan constructed identities. What Rosen says is that in Morocco, people seek information about others, and then as they seek that information, they begin to create identities that are part of that. For example, instead of putting David in a category and saying he's Chinese and I won't have a relationship with him, what the Moroccans would do, they would begin to look at who he's related to, where he lives, and what his economic experience is like. And they would evaluate that, and they would say, well, you know, he may be Chinese, but he comes from a good family who's been kind to us for a long period of time and has a good reputation in the community. And so that means that probably he's someone that we would deal with differently. We look at where he lives. Well, maybe he lives in close proximity to us and is available to us and provides assistance to us. And so we'd say, well, part of his identity then is based upon the fact that he's chosen to live in our community, chosen to be a participant in our area, and committed himself to a particular kind of relationships with us. Then kinship. Oh, David gave special help to my cousin's daughter when she had a particular need in school. So he must be a good man because of the help that he gave to my cousin's daughter. Now what the Moroccan would do is the Moroccan would look at David's social roots and his relationships, and they would construct an image of who he is and what his identity was based upon on all of those variables as they work together. And so they would actually look into, they would not make a quick decision on the basis of, quote, Chinese, but they would make a decision on the basis of all the things that they knew about him, his family relationships, his economics, and his residence. They would also look at his character. They would, because, you know, David has a brother. I don't know this. I'm making this all up now. But let's say he has a brother, and they both have kinship and residence and economics that are similar, but they may be two men of very different character. You know, what are their character strengths? What are their character weaknesses? How authentic are they in their relationships with us? How do they live lives in terms of their personal purity and their personal testimony in the community? And so they would examine those features, and they would construct an identity for him on the basis of their perceptions of what he was like.
In that regard, there was a man in my country, particularly among the Akamba, in the region that I was working in Zawi. He wanted to be a member of parliament, the British system of member of parliament. And he had everything. He had money that the politicians need. And he dispensed them, just like other people would do. But people said, we are going to eat your money, but we are not going to give you power to go into the parliament and repeat what your father did to us.
Okay. Okay, I like that. We're going to eat your money.
When he was a chief.
But we're not going to let you go into parliament and do that. Okay. All right, good. Well, we're running out of time, so let me just move on here quickly and talk a little bit about normative definitions and negotiated definitions, and then I'll work toward a conclusion. If we look at normative definitions, if you remember reading in Rosen, he talked about the notion of ha, which is an Islamic word, and it focuses on the idea of duty, obligation, and relationship to God. It's a permanent kind of category in their thinking, and it's a normative category. If I think about Yap, they have the same kind of category, but it focuses on kin group and ancestors. It has a very different focus. And so I'm going to come back to that in a few minutes. But each of them focus on this mutual sense of duty. And so there are normative definitions. Ha comes out of a definition that has to do with hierarchy, whereas Yalan comes out of a definition that has to do with group. Okay? If we look at negotiated definitions, we're looking at the kind of definitions that people can bargain about. There is manipulation, there's contingency, there's accumulation of information, and so people, as I described, for example, in the illustration, trying to define David's identity, it was an accumulation of evidence, okay? And there also can be manipulation and contingency. In marriage contracts in Morocco, if you look at that book, you'll see that marriage contracts are negotiated on the basis of this kind of manipulation and contingency. Patron-client relationships in some places in the world are negotiated in the same way. I found this among Dani Indians in Brazil. The key thing is that in this process, meanings are acquired through a dialogue between the people as they engage in this negotiated process with one another. Now that's different from the normative definitions that I've described earlier. In other words, the normative and the negotiated are two different ways of defining the world. Now, as we come then to our summary, the sheet that I passed out to you earlier brings this all together in a summary focus. as we look at worldview and we try to understand the logic of social relationships, we see these all coming together into a complex whole. If we remember our grid and group framework, we have the 4 social games. The individualist game is in the green, the authoritarian game is in the yellow, the hierarchist is the blue, and the egalitarian is the red. And as we bring these concepts together, if you look at the construction of the individualist game, you see there that you have both negotiated definitions and you have the potential relationships. In other words, in that particular social game, everything is defined. And this is what you have in Morocco. You have very many of these people playing this individualist social game in which the definition of relationship can be negotiated and which the potential of the relationship is always open for creative change. If we go on to the authoritarian framework, you see there that the definitions are normative instead of negotiated. That you have duty, you have a hierarchy of categories. The categories of Islam are Imam and Hajj and some other categories that are there that have to do with statuses in their system. But there are still potential relationships. In other words, the Moroccan will look at the Jew and say, well, I can have a relationship with a Jew because I'm interested in economic contact and business. And so even though there are normative definitions and hierarchy of categories, there are still potential relationships with others that can be defined. And so this is what we would call a weak group social setting. You can make connections with people that are outside of your group. If you go on to the hierarchist now adds the insider-outsider relationship. And the hierarchist says that there are normative definitions, there are a hierarchy of categories, and people belong or they don't belong. And if they don't belong, they're outsiders. Now, I think this is what David is finding in his situation in Indonesia, that he's an outsider. And by definition, being an outsider, that's not negotiable very often unless the people are poor. And if they're poor, then they're willing to work with outsiders because they can get something from outsiders. It's kind of a bargaining relationship with outsiders who are more wealthy. We go to the last category, which is the category of the egalitarian. In the egalitarian context, the definitions of status are negotiated. For example, patron-client. Egalitarian people oftentimes value patron-client relationships from outsiders if they can get them to give to them. In other words, they look for outsiders to help them and they can engage them in terms of negotiating the relationship with them. But the insider-outsider distinction is really the key focus of their relationship. And they're very suspicious of outsiders unless they can make them patron relationships. And so egalitarian societies will have patron-client relationships, but they do it with outsiders, not with insiders. And they can either be a client or a patron in those kind of relationships for the advantage of the group. So these concepts that we have from Rosen are concepts that we can work with and understand them within the framework that we've looked at before of grid and group. I've shared this diagram with you so you can take it with you. You didn't have to copy all this down. And if you have some questions, I can answer your questions in the time that follows.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.